Hey guys, and welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're gonna be talking about Affliction Warlock. Why Affliction Warlock, you might ask yourself? This is a Shadow Priest channel. Well, I've been thinking of maybe swapping spec, or at least potentially have a second main, which would be my Warlock, and I've been quite enjoying all the Warlock specs, but the one that's really got to my heart at the moment is Affliction, because Affliction is still got some aspects that it used to have back in Legion, which is Sow the Seeds, a new talent that's come back. But enough of that, we'll talk about that in a very short moment. But before we do, make sure you sub, like, and hit that bell button, as it really helps out the channel grow. Anyway guys, let's get to it. Alright guys, so firstly let's start with talents for Affliction Warlock. We'll be covering single target / rating and M+, but I'll be giving you a lot more tips about M+, as I play a lot more M+ on my Warlock than I do with rating. So let's start with this. First row, just spec into Drain Soul. PvE content, it's always Red Soul, because Drain Soul is great for regen, and also gets a lot more bonus from one of the conduits, which we'll be talking later on about. Second row, and for M+, we're gonna be taking Riven Agony. Riven Agony, Agony's damage starts at 4 stacks and may now ramp up to 18 stacks. Basically, Agony will actually be on the damage meters, do some pretty decent damage if the pack / enemies last long enough, and it will also basically allow you to focus on doing other things like spamming Seed of Corruption. That's the M+ choice. For single target, Siphon Life. An extra dot that you basically take so you do more damage with your Malefic Rapture. Just overall better single target damage, and Riven Agony just isn't worth it in single target. Absolute Corruption, not really worth it unless you're really new to Warlock and it's your first time playing. If you are struggling to keep all your dots up, maybe, but even so, I'd say Riven Agony is just a lot better, and it's not particularly harder than playing Absolute Corruption, because you'll play Sow Seeds anyway. Next row, defensive row, or mobility row. For M+, I would always recommend Dark Pact. This talent got so buffed that pretty much any sort of damage you take that is like made for a DPS spec, of course, you'll be able to absorb and not care about. You'll be able to not care about Varulf, for example, which is one of the generals who charges at you and puts a bleed. Dark Pact will literally take the whole damage and you won't care about anything unless you maybe go in really high levels. If you really need to Warlock, you could spec into Demon Skin. Wouldn't recommend it though. Get used to Dark Pact. Dark Pact's insane and will keep you alive a lot more than Demon Skin. Burning Rush for raiding can be insane because you don't need the extra defensive that you need from Dark Pact. Now that said, Dark Pact still a great choice for progression into Mythic, but that said, Burning Rush usually the go-to for raiding. Next up, we have the AoE row. So our three choices: Sow the Seeds, Phantom Singularity, Vile Taint. Vile Taint is useless right now. It's not like you used to. You never use it. Completely worthless. Phantom Singularity, your single target choice. You pop it every minute with your Soul Rot if you play Night Fae. So you get 1 extra dot and you can spam Malefic Rapture. It also does some extra AoE, but it's not worth talking about really when you have Sow the Seeds. Sow the Seeds basically makes it so when you use Seed of Corruption, it throws an extra 2 Seed of Corruption. It is 2, right? Yeah. And then it does a lot of damage, and that will be basically your entire, like 30% of your damage in the dungeon will roughly be this talent right here, if I'm being honest. And this is the fun part about the current meta with Affliction. Next row, Dark Fury, Mortal Coil, Howl of Terror. Mortal Coil, usually the go-to. Howl of Terror, you don't play it because most dungeons don't actually care much for Fair, but I guess if you need some extra needed disruption and you don't have any spec that has a Nayo stun or just doesn't have any disruption overall, then Howl of Terror can be good. But keep in mind, Howl of Terror only faces 5 targets, just like Fae on a Priest, so that's something to keep in mind. Dark Fury, you really don't take it unless you really need an AoE stun more often and your team needs it. But Mortal Coil overall, being able to fair target and get past like 20% of your health from using it, that's just insane, dude. Always go for Mortal Coil, I'd say, but you can get fancy and try the other ones as well. It won't change your gameplay that much. Next up, second to last row. Firstly, you'll be taking Haunt for every content, aside from maybe PvP where you might consider Grimoire Sacrifice. Shadow Embrace, worthless, not gonna talk about it. Grimoire Sacrifice, you can do some really niche plays where you like summon your pet to get an extra kick in, but that's mostly for PvP stuff. For PvE, you just go Haunt. And the reason for this, even in dungeons, is so that you put your Haunt on your main target, you put your UA, so Unstable Affliction, and then you do your normal Seed/Corruption rotation, as well as like putting all your agonies on your targets. But we'll go over that afterwards. Last row, not really any choice, just Dark Soul. Your 2-minute cooldown, that goes with your, what's the name of it? Dark Fiend? I don't remember the name of that demon, I'm gonna be honest. The demon that floats around and like, basically you'll burst every 2 minutes, which I'll be mentioning in the next part anyway. But the Dark Soul Misery, that's the go-to. You don't play Creeping Death, you don't play Soul Conduit. So that's pretty much it for talents. Alright guys, so next up let's talk Legendaries. So what Legendary does Affliction use, you might ask yourself. So let's start firstly with Mythic Plus. So we got a bunch of new Legendaries in 9.1, namely the Covenant Legendaries. Pretty much all of them are useless for Affliction, aside for one, and that one is specifically from the Night Fae Covenant. What does it do? For each target you hit with Soul Rot, it increases your haste and critical strike by 5%. So, if I remember correctly, it's roughly 5 targets you can hit with it. So imagine using that in a pack, a big pack, for example the first pack of Halls of Atonement, where you lust and everything. Well, you're gonna get 25% increase in both critical strike and haste. So you're gonna be able to get a lot more dots in and spam basically corruption, Seed of Corruption. So the idea is this legendary is gonna be your main legendary as well for raiding. There are other legendaries to mention out there like Malefic Wrath for very single target orientated bosses. So I'm thinking Guardian of the First One as a good example because the fight doesn't last that long. So Malefic Wrath is actually pretty huge, it does a lot of damage. So what does Malefic Wrath do? Every time you use your Malefic Rapture, it increases the damage of Shadow Bolt or Drain Soul by 35% for 10 seconds. Stacks up to 3 times and gets refreshed every time you use Malefic Rapture. So basically it just gives you a bit more overall damage with your Drain Soul, which is not bad, and you'll probably be using it on some fights if you're progressing Mythic. Any other choices out there? Well, not really. Relic of Demonic Synergy is a good one, especially if you're playing another Covenant than Night Fae, then I would 100% recommend Relic of Demonic Synergy, which is the one we used to use last season if you've played last season. Damage done by you or your primary demon has a great chance to grant the other one 10% damage increase. So basically, random procs that increase your damage or your pet's damage by 10%. It's decent, and you'll be using it pretty much in every content if you're not playing the Night Fae one. Because you're playing another Covenant, because you preferred anything from the other Covenant, which is respectable, to be honest. But that soon won't be a problem, because we'll finally be able to sub Covenant non-stop. Can't wait for that, by the way. Anyway, that was it for Legendaries. Alright guys, next up, let's talk about Soulbind and Conduits. What are you going to be using? Firstly, if you're Night Fae, and I'll mostly be talking about Night Fae because all the other Covenants is Affliction, the offense are really bad as opposed to Night Fae. There are some potentials that you can try with Kyrian and M+, and some one-shot builds with Shadow Bolts and things for PvP and Necrolord, but generally speaking, the best choice overall and the easiest choice is to go Night Fae. So I'll be talking about Night Fae, and specifically Dreamweaver, because Dreamweaver is the best choice you've got this entire season. Everyone is playing Dreamweaver. Why is that? What did we get new? So we got a bunch of new things. So firstly, a new potency conduit. We also got Walking Dreams. When you take damage build 80%, you gain a shield for 20% of your maximum health for 12 seconds. This can only occur 1 minute. Pretty good defensive, really nice. We also get an extra finesse conduit or endurance conduit if you go for the other one. Usually would recommend Walking Dreams though. And lastly, Dream Delver, healing damage, dealing damage or healing a target grants you 1% increased damage or healing to that target for 4 seconds, up to 3%. So basically increases your damage by 3% or your healing by 3%. That's just huge. Like, that's just the best choice we have overall. Now there are some good plays you can do with Korain. There's some stuff you can do with Nayo. But overall, Dreamweaver is the go-to for pretty much any content you do. And it's the safest bet overall. So conduits, what do we do? So what you're gonna want to do is go for a endurance conduit. The first one, you either have finesse or endurance. You go for endurance. You've got 2 endurances that you particularly want. Condensed Animosphere, which is the new one we got. When you take any damage, heal for a certain amount percentage of your maximum health. This can only occur once every 10 seconds. That's dependent on item level, but roughly around 3 to 4% of your maximum health. Just a nice amount of healing per dungeon, and you'll actually see it on the meters, which is very impressive. Next up, Withering Bolt for Potency Conduit. Drain Soul deals percentage amount, an increased percentage amount of damage per damage over time effect you have active on the target. So basically, when you drain someone's soul, if they have agony, corruption, UA, well, that's basically 24% increased damage to drain soul. Now, I didn't mention Soul Rot, I didn't mention Phantom Singularity for single target, but yeah, you get the idea. So overall, some nice, it's a pretty small damage increase, but it's the best choice we got overall, and even for single target and M+. If we're talking about raiding, then we'll also be using another single target, which I'll be mentioning when we reach the third, or the second actually, potency conduit. Next up, you'll want Soothing Voice, because you want 3 potency conduits. Soothing Voice. When you root, stuns, and incapacitate class effect Aspire or are dispelled, your target's movement speed is reduced by 90%, decaying rapidly over 2 seconds. Just a nice slow, not much to say there. And here you'll want to take Soul Leader. Soul Leader, Soul Rot's damage and radius is increased by 37.5%, up to 40% depending on the item level of your conduit. What this does basically is it makes it easier for your Soul Rot to give you stacks from your Legendary, especially in M+. Next up, we have another Endurance Conduit, and it's gonna be Resolute Barrier. Attacks received that deal at least 5% of your health decrease unending resolves cooldown by 10, up to I think 12 or 13, cannot occur more than once every 25 seconds. So it just reduces the cooldown of your main defensive CD, which is Wall, or Unending Barrier if you want to call it that. But reduces the incoming damage you take by 40% on the 3-minute cooldown, makes it impossible for you to get interrupted as well. So pretty big cooldown that you'll be using sometimes as like a oh shit button, because your heal doesn't have a cooldown and you're gonna take a lot of damage and you can't escape from it. Next up, here It's a bit what you choose. There's not any effects from choosing one or the other, so just read and see what you like. Next up, Field of Blossoms. Soul Rot puts flowers at your feet for 12 seconds. That increases your haste by 15% while you stand with them. What does that mean? That basically means that when you Soul Rot, you basically get 15% haste for free, along with the percentage haste you get from your legendary. So at max, roughly 40% haste. That is a lot of haste. And I haven't even talked about Dark Soul Misery, which is another 30%. We're talking 70% haste at max. That's without Lust as well, which is 100% haste. Like, those are some really big numbers. So standing in that and being in a nice position where no mechanics are gonna hit you is great, because that will just increase your haste to a point of no return. Last, Potency Conduit. Rolling Agony for AoE. The duration of Agony is increased by a certain amount. Just makes it so you don't have to like stop spamming Seed of Corruption and just like, you know, keep on spamming Agony on the targets non-stop. No, you just put Agony, it lasts for a bit longer. Really nice conduit, really appreciate it. You don't use this in single target though, and you run Focus Malignancy because you actually use Malefic Rapture in raiding. Malefic Rapture deals 11% increased damage to targets suffering from Unstable Affliction. Just some nice single target damage increase. Next finesse, first finesse we actually get. Fell Celerity. The cooldown of Fell Domination is reduced by 69 seconds. That's really dependent on what you like. Look at them, see if you prefer one or the other. I'd say Demonic Momentum and Fell Celerity are pretty close, but the ability to swap from the Fell Hunter to the Imp for the Dispel is quite huge, but that's up to you. Anyway, that was it for Conduits and Soulbinds. Alright guys, next up let's talk stats priority, beasts in slot, trinkets, and domination sockets, since they're quite important. So what are you gonna need for stats? So stats works the following way for Affliction Warlock. Haste, followed by Mastery, followed by Crit, followed by Verse, and that's pretty much it. Intellect at the top, of course, so eye level before stats, unless it's a very small change in eye level. So roughly how much haste do I want, and how much mastery and crit do I want? So what I have seen is the best so far is something around 800, between 750 and 800 haste, which is roughly 23%. 70% mastery. I can't tell you the exact numbers, I can't remember the top of my head, but roughly 70% to 75% mastery. 13% crit is pretty nice. If I remember correctly, that's 300 crit. And you want some verse if you push keys above 20, so I'd recommend roughly 5 to 10% verse. So you lose a bit on the other stats, but hey, you get some extra survivability, which is always nice. For trinkets, it's quite simple. Ruby, Soul Letting Ruby from TOP, Fate of Pain, is your best in slot unused trinket, and you'll always want to have it. As for your other trinket, you want the KT trinket, so the trinket that drops from Kel'Thuzad, from the new raid. Oh, well, actually it's not new anymore, but yeah, from Sanctum of Domination. Let's go to Domination sockets. What do you want? So for Domination socks, you want to run the Unholy set, first of all. And you want to be using the damage amplifiers from both Blood and Frost to go along with it. So one of them increases your damage by 2.50% every time you hit a new target, and it lasts for 20 seconds. And the other one basically increases your damage when you have 50% more HP than the enemy. So basically, and it works a bit like an execute. And that's pretty much it for Domination sockets. For coming back to trinkets for a second, What else can you use if you don't have the availability of doing KT Mythic or KTHC? What are your other choices? The Trinket from I is actually really good. It gives you some extra stats. That's what I'm running with right now. Because I haven't had the KT Trinket, hasn't dropped yet for me. And this is my ult as well, so yeah. But what other trinkets as well? Changeling is also really good. PvP trinkets can work, not particularly good. Would recommend Changeling above the other options, and also the trinket that drops from the eye of the jailer, which is the second boss of Sanctum. Alright guys, so now let's look a bit at rotation. So as you can see, I'm in front of 3 training dummies, so I can show you the Mythic Plus rotation, and I'll give you some tips and tricks that you can try and put in your rotation, really, to try and help the group, because we have quite a bit of utility when it comes to M+, and after that I'll also go over the rotation for single target slash raiding. So let's start firstly with M+. So what do you do? Fresh new pack, there's a bunch more ads, but sadly there isn't enough dummies. There's 3 dummies here. What do? So tank is about to pull. Let's say there's 3 targets for the sake of it. The first thing you're gonna want to do is use Haunt, because it's a cast, into UA, Unstable Affliction. Put Agony on all the targets. After that, you pop your Haste, you pop your Soul Rot, Trinket, you throw a Seed of Corruption for a second one so it blows up, expand, and then Seed of Corruption spam for maximum damage. And this is where really the damage starts to kick in, because you also have the crit from your proc with Soul Rot. But really the priority here, keep your 18 stacks on Agony after that, and your basic rotation is just gonna be to do the exact same as your burst window. Keep your Agonies up, keep your Haunt up, keep your Unstable Affliction up. And that's pretty much it. And when you're out of juice, your main priority, keep dots up, keep your Haunt up and your UA, and drain. And then as soon as you get some juice back, you can start using Seed of Corruption. Now, that said, as you can see, Soul Rot is slowly coming off cooldown again. Your goal is gonna be to actually redot everything, even though the dots right now are pretty high. You've still got 15 seconds or something, because what you want to do right now is just spam Seed of Corruption while you have the buff from your Legendary, and also the 15% haste from what you're playing right now. So that's the goal right now. Next up, let's talk just generally what you can do in a dungeon. So in a dungeon as a Warlock, there's quite a few things you can do. Firstly, health stones. This sounds like really dumb, but the biggest mistake I see anyone do when I'm on my main that plays Warlock, they don't put health stones nearly as often as they should. Like, if there's a break, there's any RP, you're not fighting, and you're not running, or you're waiting for like the cooldown on like your hidden spirit or whatever excuse you have, just put it down. Doesn't matter if people don't need it, just put it down so everyone has health stones. Health stones are just so great in dungeons and can save someone from practically any mechanic as long as it's used properly. Next up, AoE stun. This seems really dumb, but the amount of people that do not stun or AoE stun when they should is insane. So tank just pulled a bunch. Tank just pulls a bunch for you. His cooldowns are running off. So how do you see cooldowns? There's a bunch of recourse that you can use to see that, and I'll probably make a video about this because a lot of people don't see this. So let's say for example you have a bear tank, his biggest cooldown just ran off and he's trying to run away. The first thing you're gonna want to do is AoE stun, because that's gonna allow him to run, and that's gonna allow you and your group to not wipe there because your tank dies, or to waste a global having to use Soulstone to rest him. Simple as. What else can you do as a Warlock? You can slow. That's right, you can use curses to slow. Now, I wouldn't really recommend, using all the curses. Oh, there's a caster, I'm gonna use my curse so he casts slowly. No, you just want to kick it, and that's just That's just it. The best you could do, maybe put the Curse of Weakness on a really hard-hitting tyrannical boss that's meleeing your boss, like your tank a lot, or during the necrotic affix, because that does a lot of damage. So for example, Fate of Pain is a great example. You've got your 3 bosses, and the melee boss just like keeps slamming your tank and really makes it hard to reset stacks. Well, that curse might help him, but that's about it. You don't particularly use the curses outside of that. Next up, think Plaguefall. Plaguefall, there's a bunch of globs and everything. You can use Banish to CC them. That's right, you can banish globs, you can banish a bunch of mobs actually. And Banish is a really strong CC. It makes them immune, so it's basically like Cyclone, but better, because you can remove it by casting it on the target again. And it lasts for 30 seconds instead of 6 seconds, so you don't need to keep spamming it. This is just huge, and I would use it over any other CC to CC a glob or to CC a target that you can actually CC with it. What else do we have? We have Mortal Coil. So no one has a kick. This guy's about to like nuke the entire group with an AoE or whatever. Just Mortal Coil heals you as well if you need defensive on a boss. Pretty huge. Next up, pets. There's only 2 pets you'll ever be using in dungeons. The first one, your kick pet. With your kick pet, you can purge every 15 seconds, and you can silence every 24 seconds. Not much else to say, it's just your kick and your purge. Try to use them as much as you can. Where it comes to a bit more skill on the Warlock is the Imp. Imp is huge. So there's a lot of bosses, like for example in Fate of Pain, you have the Lich boss. The Lich boss puts 2 different dots on 2 different targets. And your healer's gonna dispel one, and the other one's usually gonna take maximum damage and is gonna need to use defensive. Well, actually, if you have a Warlock in your team, that's not really an issue anymore, because you can just dispel the second target that needs dispelling. Just click them, or make a macro so you don't have to click them and just make it mouse over or anything, and just use it on a target that needs using. Simple as. So, last thing that I'm gonna be talking about, because I'm talking a lot right now, is gonna be Gateway. Gateway is just so underrated. Gateway can allow you to basically win maybe 10 seconds overall if you just use it on some routes. For example, the other side. You have these 3 routes. If you put them where there's the traps in Ardenweald, you're guaranteed that your entire team's gonna use it twice. Because that's gonna make them win like, I don't know, like 5 seconds of running roughly. That's 10 seconds of running, like just free 10 seconds that you've given your group. And if you do that for each wing, that's roughly 15 seconds won. Actually 30 seconds won. That's huge. You can also use it for niche plays or to help your tank kite around when it's tough weeks for the tanks. But outside of that, just use it when you just experiment with it. It's that big. Last little note, if someone releases you in your group and they teleport to the other side of the map, you can always summon them during M+. But that's roughly it. And you've got a Battle Rest. Don't forget about that either. Lastly, we're gonna talk about single targets. Just gonna switch out my talents real quick. So, Cypher Life, Phantom Singularity, put that there. I'll keep that for now. That's pretty much it. Single target, pretty much the same thing. First thing you want to do, Haunt, travel time is roughly 1 second. And then you want to use UA, put all your dots. Soul Rot, expand, use Trinket, spam Malefic Rapture for extra damage. When you're out of juice, just use Drain. And outside of Drain, your main priority is to just keep your dots on the targets, which is all your dots this time. And roughly when Soul Rot has like 30 seconds left until it spawns again, you're gonna want to stop using Malefic Rapture, and you're just gonna want to let it go so that you can have 5 or at least 4 soul shards for when you have Soul Rot back. So those are the most important things. Outside of that, this is pretty much it. I feel like I've already been like talking long enough. Anyway, Guys, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoy. If you feel like I've missed anything or you've got anything to say, feel free to write it down in the comments. Please sub, like, and dub the video if you enjoy my content, and I'll see you guys around. Thank you.